this lovely, great condition Vibrolux reverb. All I know now is it's 69 or later. I'll date it as I go. Just came in, and the owner says, makes awful noise. I'm not going to demonstrate said awful noise until I take a look and make sure that no filter caps are burning or exploding everywhere. Some causes of awful noise are really minor, and some causes are fire hazards. So if there is the beginning of damage, I don't want to make it worse. If I see everything is safe, then we'll explore the awful noise together, unless there is some obvious horrible cause. The transformers all have a 9 in the date code, and given the amount of wax on the board, this CBS spaghetti wiring, and the fact that the baffle is dadoed and glued rather than screwed to the cabinet, that puts us as a 79. My buddy Rob Hall has serviced this amp back in 2013. I've already made sure there's no voltage here. I'm just gonna make sure that these dropping resistors, looks like he kept the originals, are still good. 10.3K and 2.28. So yeah, that's the 2.2K they used in this era versus the 1K in the earlier ones. So far, everything looks good. This IC brand cap is a possible culprit. These F&T should be fine, but a 9-year-old IC brand cap, it's hit or miss. This is a better quality cap than the ones that you find in the Fender reissue and blues series, though. And for those wondering, Vibrolux should have 5 of these 16 or 22 microfarad caps. Rob just used a single 47 instead of two 22s in parallel, or two 16s in parallel. Absolutely fine. Let's look on the inside. All right, down here at the business end, he recapped it. 2013. It's got the original diode there. It's probably okay. I'll check that. It has original screen grids and grid stoppers, but they measure fine. I don't always change those myself. I often do, but then again, he did this 9 years ago, and 9 years ago, everything was 9 years younger. Even we were. He did the same trick on the bias that I do. We're adding the bias level to the existing bias balance. When following another tech, particularly one I know to do good work, I start from the assumption. I start from the place that everything he did was good 9 years ago, and that he will not have made any mistakes, but things change over time. Just as if I look at work I did 9 years ago, there are things I might have do differently today, but I know that 9 years ago, if it was an amp I worked on, it was working when it left me. So let's see what might have changed in the intervening years. All right, down here, he changed out most of the cathode bypass caps. This one looks to be original, as does this one. Potential issues. He used these 250 picofarad silver micas that are just labeled SM, and the generics that are just labeled SM are known causes of problems, are known to fail early and to leak, but 9 years ago, that was not widely known, and they may be just fine. I'm just saying this is something that I'll be checking, because for the past 5 years or so, I and other techs have had enormous failure rates with the silver mica caps that just say SM as opposed to CDM on them. It's got the original unbypassed, in this case 680 ohm cathode resistor for the reverb driver. I will change that out to a 2.2K bypass with a 22 microfarad cap, basically black facing that one part of the circuit. Makes for a happier, healthier 12AT7. But aside from that, and these two original cathode bypass caps there, and one down here as well, those are all tremolo things, pretty much. This one's reverb recovery stage. This one and this one are tremolo. So I don't see anything in here which looks to be dangerous. So let me kick the camera around a little bit and turn the trebles and basses to midway. The volume's off, reverb off, tremolo off. We're gonna hook this Vibrolux up and see what it do. All right, I've got the amp plugged into my light bulb limiter. Got it connected to my shop cab, which is an 8 ohm load versus the 4 ohm load the Vibrolux has with its own speakers, but that'll be a fine mismatch for test purposes. The first thing I want to do is just power it on while I have my coffee. And I want to visually look at these output tubes and rectifier tube. If anything's gone south, those are likely culprits. So let's just power it on and watch. If nothing happens, we'll take it out of standby and repeat the process. Well, I don't hear an earth-shattering kaboom. There's supposed to be an earth-shattering kaboom. Let's take it out of standby. Ah ha 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 ha. You see that smoke? All right, see that resistor? And the stuff bubbling out of it and all the little smoke? We power it off now. That is that unbypassed cathode resistor for the reverb driver that I mentioned I was going to replace because they failed. And this one was polite enough to do it on camera. And I bet once that started really cooking, that would make a wonderful crackling sound through the entire amp. Probably change this cap as well, just in case this one got really hot and baked. This one doesn't have any heat discoloration visible on it, but it sure was emitting smoke, so, and I bet it would soon be stinky. So I think this is going to get replaced with a 2.2K bypass with a cap, like I said, and this is going to get changed as well, just in case it got baked. It's probably fine, but for peace of mind, it's an inexpensive part we're spending $1 on. I'm going to change that out and we'll revisit this whole thing. Well, that was fun. Bad 12AT7 on top of the bad resistor, or one caused the other. I imagine the 12AT7 failed, which hastened the decline of that resistor, which already had a ton of current. Anyway, now it's got a new 2.2K resistor, bypass cap on both of these, replaced this one in case it had heat exposure, and then over in the tremolo circuit and the reverb recovery stage. New caps there as well, just so all the old electrolytics are out of this amp, just for peace of mind. They're inexpensive, it's easy to do while I'm in there. Let's take it out of standby and watch for magic smoke. While we wait for that to possibly blow up in our faces, let's see if the normal channel is working okay. That all seems okay. Let's make sure the bright cap's working. So far, so good. I'm still watching that resistor just in case there's some other thing contributing to a current issue, but it's really, given the topology, it can only be the transformer. Usually you'd hear arcing. The tube, which has been changed, or that resistor, the cathode resistor, which has been changed. So try the reverb channel, vibrato channel. Let me move this out of the way. I'm not hearing any scratchiness there on the treble pot, so those silver micas are probably just fine, but I'm gonna let them run for a while just in case things need to build up. Both the switches need a little bit of cleaning, but that's no big deal. I'm gonna get a little plug in there so we can test the vibrato. I make up these little dummy plugs for this purpose. All right, for a preliminary test, that sounds really good. Now, like I said, these silver micas can leak, and I'm gonna let them get warm. I need to check for DC present on the wax board in places it ought not to be. particularly this node right here, the junction of this cap and the cap feeding the reverb. That is just so close to that B plus node that it often leaks. I need to check the bias, and I have found sometimes after these run for 20 minutes or so, at that point, tremolo ticking can start, though there is an easy fix for it, which actually Rob's already applied to this one, so it's very unlikely. I've not done a full inspection of all the solder joints. Someone asked in a previous video, had a real Bassman had a really warped, really curvy board, whether the solder joints can break from that. And yes, absolutely, especially the horizontally mounted resistors. This one here in the phase inverter is especially prone to that, but also, the slope resistors. And this one here in the tremolo are all commonplaces. But this board has not warped much, so probably okay, but I will give it an inspection. And what I'm going to do next is something that I've not seen in a lot of how to fix tube amp books, but it's something that I have found has served me well. I like to cover it up because the heat from the tubes rises. And if it's covered like this, it's closer to replicating what its life is like inside the cabinet, and you're more likely to heat things up this way. So I'm gonna let this run for like 20 minutes covered and let the heat build up and see where we're at. It just gives me a realistic check without putting it back in the cabinet a whole bunch of times, which, it's a pain in the butt. All right, spoke to the owner and let it run for about 20 minutes with the cover on. And in the meantime, I've got 120 millivolts here, which is coming out at this junction, which is close to B plus node here. There's standard problems with a wax board fender. Right here at this node that I said can be problematic, it's also here. I've got half a volt, which should be 0. And at this silver mica, I've got about 60 millivolts. And both those problems exhibit as this. That hum. It's a little exaggerated with my hand there, but it's there in the background. It's stronger on the reverb channel than it is on the normal channel. The one on the normal channel is the leakage that I showed down here, which is actually coming in, I think, here. But this leakage, that half a volt and that 60 millivolts, that's on the reverb channel. So, time to de-wax some things. All right, you see here, I've removed these components. You can see how the wax has these rings. And the wax around this ring is blended with the wax around this ring, which is blended with the wax around this ring. And there's puddles of wax where those resistors used to be. Well, it's really thick. And as I've said in other videos, but just in case this is the first time you've seen one of these, every time you use the amp, and remember this is from 1979, this amp's been used a lot, especially back in the days when people would smoke in bars and stuff. The wax gets soft as the amp is used because the amp gets hot, and all the particles in the air get into the amp and settle in that warm wax and build up a layer. And then the amp cools, and all those particles of smoke and stuff are trapped in the wax, and that process repeats. And by the end of it, instead of having just wax on things, you've got a wax matrix, which is holding all kinds of gunk in there, which becomes conductive. I'm going to do it down here at this end as well a little bit, not as badly, though there's still a bunch underneath those plate resistors. So I try to get as much of the wax off as possible. Ironically, Fender waxed these things to stop things from absorbing moisture and becoming conductive that way. So it was a short-term solution which ended up causing a long-term problem. So I'm going to get the old solder out of those affected eyelets and heat the board up and get as much wax off as possible and see if that did the trick. Okay, I de-waxed this area here where the mix resistors are because voltage was getting from this eyelet to here. I de-waxed this Charlie Foxtrot cluster here, which is both the reverb standard stuff you get for the mixer in a Fender, and also this pull boost nonsense that was tacked on here in this era. Anyway, there was a bunch of wax here and it was all picking up DC from here. And then in this area, which is a fairly commonplace for every post 73 fender, and you know, anything from 63 on can get it if the board gets moisture in it, but the heavily waxed boards are especially problematic over here. And I cleaned up this one too, which was just getting a trace from over here. And now all that DC is gone off all those eyelets. The most troubling was the about 60 millivolts I had here, which was just a omnipresent noise, and the on the normal channel, and that half a volt being mixed in with all the reverb stuff. Never a good thing to have DC in there. And the amp now, very clear, really nice response, no real background noise. It'll be pretty much dead silent once it's back in the cabinet with the full shielding. I am going to change the two silver micas just because they can fail, and it's an inexpensive thing to put into higher quality caps there, but that's no big deal. So I think the owner is going to be very, very happy when the new caps are in place and the new take-home JAN 12AT7 arrives. We'll put it together and let you hear it through its speakers. What a lovely old amp, and you know, just a little bit of love and it's good for another 20 years.